move this one to the side. And actually, I think this time I was able to have everything in VS Code in here. So I don't know if this looks better than last time. Last time it was very small text. Is this font okay? For everybody can see what is on screen?
Yes, I can see it.
Okay. So yeah, I found out that there's a simple browser in in VS Code, and you can have the KubeBuilder here. Last time the problem was I was trying to build a container and push the container. So the command is make Docker build or Docker build X if you're doing multi-platform. We'll look at that. But I was having problems with my authentication to Docker. So if you have problems with that, just like the way I fixed it was I did a remove of the Docker config. I just removed the Docker config, and then I did a Docker. I think it was maybe the token it was expired or something, but I did a Docker login dash s. I think dash u the user, but uh, docker.io, and then I put my username and password, and I was able to like get Docker working. So Docker is working, and I have Kind working, and I have the cluster. So we are using a Kind cluster, and if you're new, follow what I mentioned before in the notes. If you're new to the book club, um, it's one way of setting up your environment with Go, Kind, and the KubeBuilder utility, which you will need to do to start. But I'm using something called the DevPod. So that's like a virtual environment or a remote environment where everything's there. So we have Kind working. So if we do k get nodes, I should have one node called the Kind. And if I do k get pods dash a, I have a Kind cluster running, and it looks like I left my controller
Controller
deployed, or
deployed, or
I just deployed a few minutes ago. I think that was 6 days ago. So I did the build. Let me see. I think it works. Everything should be cache. And last time, like we discussed that this is like the long way. Like if you're going to actually test it on the cluster, normally you want to just run it, make run or debug. We showed that last time. Just debug it, and then I'm going to deploy it. And then I will do a get pods and get it's a namespace where this gets deployed. So if I do get pods dash type, hide this. Am I still sharing? I think I moved something. Get pods dash a. Then you can see here there's a namespace called KubeBuilder Book Club System, and it's there. And then if we do make on deploy, then it remove it from the cluster. And on deploy it will remove the CRDs. As you can see, it deleted the CRDs, which is this line. It deleted the namespace that removed all the pods, and then it removed all the cluster row bindings and the service and everything there. So if I do k get pods, it's not longer there. And if I deploy it again, let's deploy it. You see my KubeBuilder is running 2 seconds ago, and the CR is gone. So that's a good question. Let me think. If you if you have a CRD and you create a resource for that CRD, and then maybe by mistake you delete the CRD, or and is the object still in etcd? And the second question is, if you put back the CRD, is the resource coming alive again? Does somebody know the answer to that, or understood the question? We can show it here. So we have now, if I do get CRD, we have our CRD here. Let me clear the screen. CRD. So we're building for people that are new, we're building a controller on operator, and the CRD is cron jobs. So it will start doing, it will reconcile CRs of cron jobs. So right now I don't have any of them. So if I do get cronjob.bash.tutorial, nothing, right? Not even globally. But let's deploy one. So I have one here in the samples. There's a cron job for our tutorial. This is not the normal Kubernetes cron job. The tutorial, and then I going to create the resource. I mean, this one basically says every 1 minute create a job, and then this is the job for the pod, and basically it's going to run and just print that. So let's do a kube apply of that. Kube apply -f samples. No, where's the folder? Oh, config samples, and is batch, right? I don't think I need this one. I can do, yeah, it's just, this is the YAML file. So people, let me put my thing to not disturb. So if we check now, we should have in the namespace, which namespace do we use? I think it's the local namespace. So I can do this, and there's a cron job 19 seconds ago. So if we check if there's pods, get jobs, it's maybe 1 minute haven't passed. So 19 seconds, 35 seconds. So we have 30 seconds to work. So this will create a job following the schedule, our controller, and it will have this container, which is busybox echoes hello from Kubernetes cluster, and then ends. And then a minute later, another job is going to be created, and then the job creates the pod, and so on and so on. So let's see if 60 seconds have passed, 63 seconds, and then we check if there's a job. There's a job here, right? And then if I do get pods, then there's a pod here and complete it. So in 60 more seconds, that will happen again. But that's because my CR is present. So the question is, does Kubernetes allow me to delete the CRD? So the CRD is this one, get CRD. That's the CRD. Does Kubernetes allow me to do this? CRD cron job. That, Eric, any idea?
I'm sorry, I'm dealing with something work related. What was the question?
Can I delete a CRD if I created resources with the CRD?
Oh, good grief.
You cannot create more samples if we try to create one, but what happens with the one that is present in etcd?
So if you delete
It
the
stays, doesn't it?
Say again?
It stays, doesn't it?
Okay,
Unless
one
you
person
say-
says that stays.
Yeah, I imagine that unless the application would have its own cleanup, when you delete the CRD, the CR would stay. It just wouldn't do anything correctly.
Okay, that's a good guess. Anyone else? Well, let's want to try it. See what happens. Or somebody thinks that Kubernetes maybe smart enough to say like, hey, you cannot delete the CRD because you have things that depend on this type.
Yeah, I don't know.
Or the last question is like, what would you want Kubernetes to do?
I mean, I'd like it to not let it delete a CRD if I have instances of the CRD, right?
Yep. Okay,
that's
a good wish.
Yeah. Now that being said, I mean, will it do it automatically? I know CRDs were added later in Kubernetes, so I don't, it's a little different for what's supported or not.
Yep. So the thing is, I have echo now. Is it me? Hello? Okay. So the thing is, let's just to experiment. I think I'll take a long time on this question. I don't know if it's useful or not. So if we do k edit CRD cron jobs, it doesn't open VS Code. I haven't checked. Fine. So the CRD has, I was going to show. So the CRD, when you delete this resource, there's nothing stored in this CRD that says these are the instances of this type. So Kubernetes doesn't know if they're instances of this type. What it knows is there's an owner of the CRD, and there might be a finalizer that you can put on the CRD. I mean, I cannot see the YAML. Sorry. Let me see if I can do it. Does somebody knows? Does this thing works if I do code? I do code. Go.mod is opened. Okay. So if I do, somebody knows the. Anyway, let me do it the hard way. Get crd-o YAML crd.yaml, right? And then it's going to show something. So in here, you can see the CRD doesn't have any information that it tells Kubernetes, hey, please do X or prevent me from being deleted, right? Because it doesn't have any state of saying like there are 1,000 CRs that depend on this type. So Kubernetes will just like, yeah, you want to delete it? Go ahead, delete it. You not impede me. Another one way that folks deal with this is they can put a finalizer. If you can read on finalizers, meaning a finalizer is a pointer to say, do not delete this until you handle the finalizer. And then you can have the controller handle the finalizer saying like, I need to do the cleanup. It does work, right? It's smart enough to say like, hey, I want to prevent the CRD from doing it, or I want to do something with the data before this thing gets deleted or something. So you can use finalizer. So sometimes for some projects you will see finalizer. And like one example that I saw lately was Crossplane. When you use Crossplane, it installs a bunch of CRDs, but those CRDs are installed by another controller. It's not the administrator installing the CRD, is a controller. Like think about it like a provider or installer of CRDs, and it has a finalizer to say, I have to do upgrades or to catch how do I manage those CRDs so they're being managed. But anyway, that's the answer. So let's give it a try because I want to move on. So let's delete it. If I do a delete CRD and I delete this thing, is deleted. Now if I do k, what's the command? K get cron jobs. Where is it here? You don't have cron jobs. Kubernetes doesn't know what this type is. So it doesn't know how to query etcd for resources of type cron jobs with this API group. So it doesn't know how to query the etcd. They don't exist. There's no types of that thing. So and then your controller, when it's watching for resources of type cron job, like of these resources, Kubernetes API will say like, I don't know what you're asking for. Like you're watching something that doesn't exist. So that your controller is like, yeah, it's watching for objects of this kind and this API, but nothing is returned because they don't exist. So that, I don't know, is that useful?
Yeah, so you deleted the definition, but
Yep.
not the persistence or the anything that's running, but nobody can talk to it now because the definition doesn't exist.
Yep. And what about if I put the definition back? You think the object will come back up and it will show up?
Yeah, I do.
Okay. You want to try it? Let's try it.
I actually think that it might not, because I think it might get registered at creation.
Let's try
Because
it.
it would have like a key.
Yeah, I think maybe.
Let's try it. What's the command just to do the CRD so we don't mess this thing? Is it this guy, right? Is make install. We'll do a make install. That only does. We have a CRD. What's the CRD, right? We have the CRD. It's there. And then our object. See if it's there. 1, 2, 3. It's not there. You lost all your work. And you didn't back up with Valero. Lesson learned. So if you have a backup with Valero of all your resources, then you run Valero backup restore, and then they show up. So that's how you do it in production. I'm not an expert. I just happen to like make these dumb mistakes and learn from them.
Well, they obviously don't have CRDs on the CKA test I just took. I would have failed those.
Okay. So I took I think more time than I wanted, but I think I usually do that. So sorry. Going to a rat hole. But you tell me if it's useful or not. But this is how I learned. Like if I'm doing this thing and I just happen to do it live here with you folks, right? And it's more entertaining, I think, than doing it by myself. And asking the questions to myself and answering to myself. So that's how it works. Like the extra homework, if you want to learn more Kubernetes, is, and you can come back with the answer if you want. Go ahead and use the etcd client and go directly to the database and see if the object is still there, and that might be a way to restore it, right? But it might not be referenced from here, because I never deleted it from etcd. I never told it to delete it. So etcd, so it's sitting in etcd. It's just happening. It cannot be restored, and I don't know the details of why not and all that stuff. So, but that could be homework for you. Okay, moving on. Let's look for any questions on that. I think it's useful when you are working with Kubernetes and people delete stuff, or you delete stuff, and then you don't know how to recover, or you try to delete CRD and you don't know what the CRD doesn't delete, and then you learn about finalizers. So I think it's useful. What am I looking for? We deploy it. Where is it? We are implementing. What is controller? Implementing it. We did this. I cannot see this thing. I'm going to lower the font one. Is that still okay? Main, I think we did this part. We went over like what is in main. And then implementing defaulting and validation webhooks. And I think I talked a little bit last time about this, which is like you can have in the CRD, I think we have the CRD here. In the CRD, you can do defaults. So sometimes it's better just to have the default static in here in the Open API spec. Then that's your documentation or your API. And then you have a GUI with Open API spec. You can actually see what is expected defaults. And that's what I think is the best way of setting defaults. But it might be situations where you need, like, I don't know, logic that the default cannot be expressed in here. So that's where you would do it in code in Go, right? And that's where like you would do defaulting. And also validation, I would say with the new and recent enhancements in Kubernetes about using cell or CEL expression, you can have expressions now in CRD that are very rich in way of validating something. For example, if you want to validate, I don't know if you can do this or not, but maybe dumb example, like validate that a string is a valid email string, right? So you cannot put a regular expression here. You couldn't. With cell, you can do something like that, or it ends with this prefix, or it starts with this prefix. Before having cell CEL support, you have to do that in your Go code, in your validation webhook, when the request comes in. So that's why the reason they exist. But the Kubernetes community have done a lot of work to move from doing it in code to do it in here. And it's not like YAML is better than Go. I think it's not. But if you express it here, then it becomes documentation. So that's I think that's why it's better. So let's do webhooks. So to do webhooks in KubeBuilder is an extra step. So we did an API. The webhook is something extra that you do that you may want to do or may not want to do. You saw that the controller works. Like it works. We don't need. We didn't have to implement webhooks, but the webhook is something extra that you will do when you want to do mutations, validation, defaulting. So let's run this command, and this command should create a webhook of group watch. The version is v1, the kind is cron job, and then is defaulting and programmatic validation. So if we run that, we should have extra files. I'm going to run it before this so we can see what it generates. So CRD, we don't need it anymore. And then customization.yaml. This one, I think we can leave it like that, because that changes. Like if I deploy from a if I deploy from Kubernetes, or I deploy from here, then I change the image and all that. So I'm going to leave that like that. Doesn't matter, that it gets changed every time. So let me run it and see what it does. It runs, basically it did the customize, it did the go mode tidy that we already saw in the previous meetup. It did the make generate. So now it can generate more stuff and then make manifest. So now every time you do make generate, make manifest, make install, it will take into account now the new files that we added. And it says 14 here. So let's see what it added. Something called project. Interesting. There's a file called project. So maybe this is a KubeBuilder thing. Yep, it's a KubeBuilder. It says code generated by the tool, do not edit. So now we have webhooks, defaulting, validation, webhook version. What else it did? This Go code is the one that we will be, I think this is generated. We don't have to touch that one. This one is test, which usually is very good. So this is like your initial tests that you do. What else it did? Generate deep copy. This is just like a ZZ or like deep copy of doing Go objects, copying. And then it modified the main.go. I think that what mentions in the book, it says this was scaffold manager into your main.go. So it added setup with webhook with manager to add it. And then what else? I think that's it. And then this is the trick. So now webhooks, Kube API will call the webhooks, and it will call them in. Oh, there's comments or questions in the chat. Sorry, I wasn't looking. CRD to get deleted when any CRD we need to use finalizers in CRD. Is this understanding correct? No, it would not impede. So if you have a finalizer on the CRD, it would not impede from the CRs being, the CRs never got deleted. They're still in etcd, so they're not recoverable. And then will be application logic, how you want to handle it. Good question. The next thing that they created was certificate manager. Was a certificate from the project. Certificate manager, if you're not familiar with certificate manager, is a very used project to handle SSL certificates, TLS certificates. And then in this case, we are using it in our controller because when the Kube API server calls with HTTP to our webhook, when some request comes in, that's the entry point that our code gets called through HTTP. Kube API doesn't do HTTP port 80 for the longest time that I know. And I don't know if you can override it, but I think it's a requirement that needs to be HTTPS. A mission controller. So the Kube API server needs to trust that certificate presented by the server. So in this case, KubeBuilder is helpful enough to set up the webhooks with cert managers so they can get a certificate in the webhook and also put the CA bundle in the definition for the Kube API server. So this is what it generated, and then this is how your webhook gets called: service namespace, and it gets called with this name. So these are the DNS names that the Kube API server needs to know about. I think Eric had a comment. A mission controller can block the CRD deletion if resource exists. Yeah, that could be one way. That's correct. This is customization.yaml. This is customize config.yaml. This is a new, I think this is a customized file. Interesting. I'm not familiar with this one. The patch, this is the deployment that you get, and these are sitting in which folder? Config. And then the CA injection, this is how you inject the CA bundle. We're going to see it in a minute. Basically, you add an annotation to the validation and mutation webhooks, and then cert manager will see that annotation and then put the CA bundle in the correct place there. So it's a little bit of magic, but it's useful magic. And this is customize for the webhook, customize for the webhook, and then the service definition. So these webhooks, you will put a service, and that's the service that Kubernetes API server is going to call, like service.namespace.service or service.namespace.service.local cluster.local. And then port is 443, like we talked about. It's going to be 443, and then the webhook itself is going to listen in 9443 HTTPS. So there's no like TLS termination. And that's all the files that I generated. Went over those files. So I always like to see when I run a command, what is the magic that it does. So seeing the Git history is good. I mean, we can, if we do more changes, we can see them. So I'm going to add them here. The main.go, it talks about if you have a very old version of 1.16. I think they should remove this. No one should be running Kubernetes 1.16. We don't even do like CVE patches. We were talking about that earlier. And then next we'll set up a logger for the webhooks. Then we set up a webhook for the manager. So this is what we saw there. In the main, I don't think we have to do it. And then the markers that we find, markers in which file? Doesn't say. It talks about the markers for the webhook. And then the default method is expected to mutate receiver settings, the default. So this is happening in which file? A little bit lost on which file it's talking about. And this is where I go back to. So it's talking about like the implementing the the validation, and also like it validates the string. I think I saw it here, right? If somebody puts something here that is not a real cron thing, right? It puts here, I don't know, something else, something. Who's going to validate? That's also like a validation, right? You want to validate that this is a cron job. So this is the one that validates the schedule format. So these pieces, this is the part that I don't like about the book, that it puts pieces, but it doesn't say where to put them. And I think here is in cron job webhook.go. And one thing that I like to do is, let me see if it opens the thing for me. It didn't. Let's see. Like, so last time we talked about like getting the files, like as you do this lab, the final files, you can get them from the KubeBuilder book website under I think it's on the docs test data. So let me bring the browser up and I'll copy that for there. From there, I think I had it here. So if I go to GitHub, and this is a little bit big for me. You go to docs, and then you go to book, and you go to source, and you go Chrome job tutorial test data project. This is the project that we have. So the file that we are looking for is API v1 cron job webhook.go, this guy in here. So I prefer to go over these things like this versus like in pieces. But when you read the book, if you're reading the book, then you go over this thing. But if you're doing hands-on, then I prefer the file. So this is what it's talking about, that this file will have this function to add the controller webhook manager. It has the information around explaining what's happening, that you have a cron job log that you can use to log things in this function. And then it explains what else explains? The default, it's called the defaulter. Where's the defaulter? Cron job, it talks about the cron job. What's the defaulter? Defaulter. I thought I saw defaulter somewhere. Here it is. So this is how it's doing defaults. So if it's empty, then allow concurrent is the value. But if you want to not have this code, this is what I was talking earlier. Like if the user doesn't put concurrent policy, allow concurrent. So for example, in here, if I don't put allow, then it should default to allow, right? But it's the default. But if we look at the CRD, I think I deleted the CRD. How do I get back the CRD? Get it back here. Still we have it. If we look for that in here, I prefer to put it here as a default. Where is that thing? So concurrent policy. See, you can put these three words: allow, forbid, replace. But I will put the default, which I think is default, right? You can say allow, and then if the user doesn't put it, then I put it there. But we talked before, it's not good and good practice to edit the YAML directly where we are generating it. Actually, the correct place, it will be the one that is being generated, which is CRD in here, right? You will put it in. You will put it as an annotation using a KubeBuilder annotation to use as a default. But in here, the example, they're just teaching you how to do anything that you want to do programmatically. So it looks like it does. If you don't provide these values, these are the default values. And then the next one is checking. And then this marker is the one that creates the webhook manifest files. So this will create the RBAC, create, update, and delete. And then the path for, like, you call the HTTP, but you call it on a certain path, or this is a salt resource. I think that's the patch. Mutate false, and that's the patch. So that's why I said last time, read the reference on annotations. It's very useful because it shows you the things that you can do. And then lastly, what was the last thing that it was doing? I like that it was doing the validate the schedule. So it's validating the format. So the format should be here somewhere. Where's the validate format? Just spec. So it's getting the spec and then doing a validate schedule. And then validate schedule is at the bottom. And then it's using the library that we were using to, that we added, the Go library, the third-party Go library. And then it has a function that says parse the standard schedule. And then if it's not valid, it will return an error. So if we don't, which we could do that, like we can put that fake thing that I put in here, run it, and then you will not get any errors because you don't have a validation webhook to validate that this is correct. But now that we're going to have the validation webhook, we can test it with the validation webhook. So let's see if we can get that far. And then this one is validate the cron job name. So this one is if you put something, so pods or like names in Kubernetes cannot be longer. The job name cannot be longer. Like when you create a job, cannot be longer than 63 characters, and it needs to be a DNS domain. So it's checking that. And then it is because the timestamp is added, then it's doing the math like 63 minus 11, 52. So it's checking against 52, which is hard coded here, like DNS 1035 label max length minus 11. So this is like utilities that are added. So that one is I think it's just generated out of the name, cron job name, and then the spec will have it. I think that's what I saw, and then a timestamp. So if you put something here that is not a DNS name, it will give an error. So that will be another condition that you can check in your validation webhooks. And those are good conditions. That's something that the name, yeah. But this is something that when you create the job should catch. I don't know why is it doing it here. Now that I think about it, but we'll see later. The same thing as you will not check like things that you put in here if they're valid for a pod spec or not, right? This is a pod spec. You don't want to start validating this thing. You want the system to just return an error if you pass something bad. So I don't know why they're doing it for the job. Maybe it's an example. And also here, it also says like validating the length of the string can be done declarative by validation schema. So this is what we're saying. You can also validate the length with the schema, and you don't have to put it in logic and do the math. So I think that's the webhooks. Let me see what's the next thing. Optional. If opting to make any changes to the API definition, you can run. So if you want to change something of the files that it added, you can do make manifest. And then to install it, that's how the controller, we can run it against the controller. Before this, we need to install our CRDs. That's very quick start. This will automatically update the YAML files. And then it says to run it, you would need to put enable. Like we haven't done this because we don't have webhooks. But now that we have webhooks, when we do make run, the webhooks cannot run in our computer in the host, because the Kube API server is running inside the cluster, so it cannot talk out to the webhook. So I think it's in this section or another section that explains more details on why is that. But in this case, what they're doing here is what we did before, was just to run it and then set this to false. So we can do those steps in here. Let me do it quickly. It will not change anything. If I do make manifest, I think everything will stay the same. So make manifest, since I didn't change anything, here's that's my CRD that I can delete again. I don't need it. And then in manifest, oh, generated a manifest. So here's the manifest of a mutation webhook, and then a validation webhook. Where is this thing? Config webhook. Let's see it here. It's better to see it here. Config. There's a webhook somewhere. Where's the webhook? Oh, this folder, right? Manifest.yaml. So that's the mutation webhook. Is somebody familiar with this schema? I think this came in the CKA, right? Eric, you need to know about these objects, mutation, and validation webhooks.
I think that's a CKS related thing.
Oh, for CKS? Okay.
I don't remember it in the CKA, at least not this time.
I think for CK you needed to do the image thing on the mission controller, but not this one. But yeah, so that's why this is the reason when you see controllers and operators and all these add-ons that you install in Kubernetes, it's not just the controller reconciling the thing, it's also this thing needs to be installed. And in some instances, operations teams or SRE teams, they really want to handle like who the Kube API talks to, track what. So they protect these two types of resources very. They guard it very good, because what happens is sometimes is if you put the validation webhook to an API that maybe it's flaky or it's down or you deleted your pod, then nothing else goes through. You just did a denial of service. So that's why they're like very powerful. But then if they don't work, and there's a setting that you can say like good if there's there, if it's not good, then continue. But by default, usually all the time, they have to be up 24/7 if you want to make, because the thing, if you put in something that is like critical to the validation of the request and it needs to hit your validation webhook, then you don't want, maybe for some reason, like you don't want to allow that request to go through the Kubernetes cluster unless it validates, it hits the validate. So it's not like, well, when it's available, it's going to validate it. If it's not available, it's going to validate it. So this is sometimes a root cause when Kubernetes in production is not working. I'm not saying that it's always, but it's one of the root causes on making the Kube API sick. Somebody had a question. Oh, Terrence is leaving. I think we're almost at time. So that's the manifest. And then if we do a make install, basically the make install that we saw in the make file is going to do the CRD folder. I think it doesn't do everything, but and then if we do the make install, I think this just installs the CRD. And I don't know why it does to. This is the stuff that we already did. This is why in the book I said last session that they should have done, like, once you did the controller, go ahead and deploy it, and then webhooks is the next thing, and then do them and deploy them. So right now they put them here, so that's why a little bit like confusing, that then you have to like, well, I just did webhooks, I want to use them, but then the example says do not use them. So if you run it here, this is just a validation that the command that you did, any changes that you did, the Go code that you did is correct. So in this case, there's an error, it looks like. cannot open TLS. So see, this is it's trying to open the certificate because the webhook is running, and I thought I did do not run. So it should not be running the code for the webhook. Let me see, try it again if I did something wrong. But that's the purpose of this flag. Not do anything with the webhook, so it should not be trying to read this file. Setup problem running manager error tmp not such file or directory. Let's see if that file is there. Something it's not there. I think I ran through this problem. I don't remember what I did to fix it. I have it in a different branch. So make run. Yeah, so there's a problem with this file, and I don't know why it wants that file, because yeah, so I think we'll stop here, and then next section we'll pick it up fixing this issue. We'll fix this issue and then run it. We already did this. We deploy it, right? So we'll move on into setting up Cert Manager. If you haven't never used Cert Manager, we'll install it together. And then we'll go over like what is the CA injector magic of like adding the CA bundle into mutation and validation webhook. So we didn't get this far because we spent time of like deleting a CRD and adding the CRD and asking the question about what happens when you install delete the CRD. But we'll pick it up next section.